Good afternoon, friends. Today we have a lecture on modern India. As you know, we have already discussed ancient India and medieval India, and the precise topic is modern India and overview. The topic itself suggests that we are not going to discuss in details, but we just have a look what was going in that period, starting from 1750 to 1950. This is the generally considered the modern Indian history. And we all know that there were two major streams. One was the advent of British to India, its expansion and consolidation, and the other stream was the national movements going on. It started, there were big challenge before the national leaders. At one side they were exposing the British government, another way they were constructing and mobilizing the people to overthrow the British government here. So I hope this is a very interesting period, and very many of you may be knowing about the basic features, but still we are trying to give you an insight what was the major force that driven up to the independence of the country. So, and for discussion on this great topic, we have in the studio Dr. Manoj Sharma. He teaches history in Kirori Mal College, University of Delhi, and has written a number of articles on different topics in different journals. So, and he's also expert at CSTT under the MHRD. So I hope his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this period in a new way, in a new perspective. So on his behalf, I welcome Dr. Sharma for a research lecture. Welcome, sir.
Today we'll talk about modern India, an overview from 1750s to 1950, which this period had a lot of historical developments. The coming of the British, the expansion and the consolidation of the British Empire, the colonialism and the imperialism which they brought to India, then the Indian response in the form of the revolt of 1857 and the Indian national movement, which wanted to throw the British rule out of India. They wanted to liberate India from the shackles of the colonial rule. We begin our journey from 1750s with the Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar. The Battle of Plassey was fought in 1757 and the Battle of Buxar in 1764. Both these battles were very important from the perspective that they initiated British in the direct administration of our country. And after the Battle of Buxar, they were able to secure the revenue rights or the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. In this way, they were able to secure some sort of a direct economic rights over the Indian revenues. When British they came to India, they came as traders. And when they came as traders, they took a lot of finished products from India and then they sold them in England. These were in the form of calicos. Calicos were the finished textiles which were much sought after in Britain, spices and other finished products. When British they took all these products, they got a lot of silver, a lot of gold to India, which was known as bullion. And at that time, India was known as the sink of the world, or the Sone ki chidiya. After that, industrial revolution took place in Britain, and the British industries they required raw materials, and these raw materials they were being taken from India to Britain, because the British industries required a lot of raw materials. And when these raw materials were sent to Britain, the Indian handicraftsmen took or purchased them at a higher cost because they were scarce in nature. And the Indian handicraftsmen lost both as buyer as well as sellers, because when they made the finished products from these raw materials, then they had the cost of the product increased, and in turn the prices of the commodity also increased. And the British products which were made in machines, they were available at a comparatively cheaper price. In the third phase, which was a phase of the finance capitalism, in the phase of finance capitalism, the British they had exhausted the investment avenues in Britain. So they had a lot of wealth. Where this wealth should be invested, that was the question. So that wealth was invested in India, and the British they got a lot of interest from India because of these kind of investments. Moreover, when these investments were made in India, then they were invested in railways and developing other telecommunication networks. because of which the British, they benefited. The troop movement, the movement of the goods, the raw materials as well as the finished products, they became comparatively easier because of the railways. The British, they employed different methods or policies to control India. They secured revenues and control over a number of areas. For example, I suggested that after the Battle of Buxar, they were able to secure the Diwani rights. Similarly, over other areas also, they were able to secure control. Secondly, in terms of the permanent settlement of Cornwallis, Lord Cornwallis introduced the permanent settlement. The permanent settlement stipulated that a fixed amount had to be paid to the British in terms of revenue by a particular date, by the sunset, which was known as the sunset laws. They were able to secure a lot of revenue because of this, and at the same time they were able to secure the support of the zamindari class, because zamindars, they were made the proprietors of the land. They also interfered in the affairs of the princely states, the various princely states. They were being interfered in the form of the subsidiary alliance of Lord Wellesley. Lord Wellesley, who came to India as a Governor General, he introduced a system which was known as the subsidiary alliance system. By this system, the Indian state had to pay for the troops which were maintained by the British in his princely state. The British were able to maintain an army at the cost of the Indian princely state. Moreover, a British resident was stationed at the state. Now that British resident was interfering in the day-to-day administration of the Indian state. Moreover, the Indian state had to forego the autonomy. They were no longer autonomous. Whatever treaties they had to undertake with other princely states, they had to secure permission of the British. So in that sense, the British, they tried to extend their control over India. Another important policy in this regard was the doctrine of lapse, which was introduced by Lord Dalhousie. Lord Dalhousie, who came to India as a Governor General, he introduced the doctrine of lapse, which stipulated that if a state did not have a natural heir, then if they will adopt an heir to the throne, they have to seek permission of the British government. The tika or the right to gaddi will be given by the British. This was a direct interference, and many of the states did not like such kind of a policy. For example, Jhansi, because of which you see in 1857 revolt, Jhansi as a state and other various states, they participated in the revolt of 1857. Another policy which was followed by British was the policy of divide and rule. They divided the Indian princely states or the various factions, those who were involved in the power struggle, and tried to seek advantage. When we are talking about 18th century, some of the historians, they say that 18th century was a dark age. The historians, they have divergent views about the 18th century. Some of them, they consider it as a dark age. The others, they reject this view. And the recent research, it tries to study the different regions and the sectors of the economy, and it argues that the picture was a mixed one. There was prosperity in some areas, while there was decline in some other areas. So we do not have some kind of definite view about 18th century. But the recent research is talking in terms of regional variations. Then we will talk about an important development in economic sphere, that was the economic impact of the colonial rule. The colonial rule and the economic policies followed by the British, it impacted or it brought a change in India. There was deindustrialization. The various industries, the handicrafts industries in India declined because of the economic policies followed by the British. With the decline of the handicraft industry, the people, those who were involved in the handicraft sector, they migrated to agriculture. And in this way, the pressure on agriculture, it increased, which resulted in the impoverishment of agriculture. Agriculture could not sustain the increased pressure, and India was not able to produce enough crops because there were no investments in agriculture, which led to a number of famines and the poverty of masses. In 19th century, we see a lot of famines. We see the way the people, they were impoverished because of various economic policies followed by the British. At the same time, there was no growth of the modern industries. The modern industries, they were not given any kind of impetus by the British government. Moreover, we also see the commercial forest policy which was followed by the British. We see a lot of deforestation because of that. A large number of trees and the forest areas, they were being cut by the British because they required wood for the construction of railways, for the construction of ships, for the construction of furnitures, and for all that they destroyed the Indian forest areas. Another important feature of modern Indian history is the socio-religious reform movements. The socio-religious reform movements in the 19th century, they were considered to be both socio as well as religious because there was interconnection between the religious beliefs as well as the social practices. And the religious reformation was a necessary prerequisite for social change. The reform movements, they were centered around caste system in the sense that there was no intermarriage and no interdining. People did not intermarry between castes and they avoided to eat together. These were some sort of a taboos in the society. The other issue was the issue of the women. The position of the women was important consideration during that time. The custom of sati, for which Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who is considered to be the father of Indian Renaissance or the father of Indian awakening, he fought against sati, and some sati was banned also because of the efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Another issue was when the young girls, they were being married at a very young age and they became widows. So child marriage, they led to the question of the widows. So now these widows, they had to be remarried. People like Ishwar Chandra Vidya Sagar, they said that the young widows, they should be remarried. Another important issue was the issue of female infanticide. In some of the areas like Rajputana, etc., where there were a lot of dowry demands, the females or the young girls, they were being murdered by the parents. The female infanticide was an important issue or an important evil during that period. The women, they were not being educated. There were certain prevalent misconceptions in the society that if women, if they will become educated, then they will become widows. So these kind of misconceptions were prevalent in the society, and women, they were not allowed to go to schools. Another problem was the issue of polygamy, that man married a number of women. So that was another problem which we see during this time, which was connected or concerned with women. When we see the social religious reform movements, we see it as some sort of a cultural ideological struggle, which represented by the social religious reform movements was an integral part of evolving national consciousness, because the movement brought initial intellectual and cultural break which made a new vision of future possible. Moreover, it was part of resistance against colonial cultural and ideological hegemony. Then we come to the revolt of 1857. The revolt of 1857 was the first armed struggle which was waged at such a huge scale. There were a number of causes for the revolt of 1857. The most immediate issue for the revolt was considered to be the issue of greased cartridges. The greased cartridges issue, in which it was the new Enfield rifle which was introduced by the British, the bullet or the cartridge had to be bitten off by mouth, and it was rumored or it was circulated that the bullet contained the pig fat or the cow fat, which was not acceptable to both the Hindus as well as the Muslims. The bad treatment which was given to the soldiers during this time, they were not considered to be in a way equal to the English. So that way they were racially maltreated. They were not also given bhatta when they traveled to foreign locations. So the military causes were some of the important reasons for the revolt of 1857. From the political perspective, the doctrine of lapse introduced by Lord Dalhousie, as we have already discussed, which did not allow the Indian princely states to adopt an heir, which also caused a lot of concern to the various princely states. In the economic sense, when we see that how the triumvirate of Sarkar, Sahukar and Zamindar, it exploited the Indian farmers, Indian agriculturalists and the different sections of the society. The different sections of the society were not at all happy because of the policies, the economic policies followed by the British. When we go into the social causes, the kind of interference of the British in the social practices like sati, child marriage, widow remarriage, which was not liked by some of the orthodox sections of the society, and they rejected the British interference in all these matters. Then we can also discuss the nature of the revolt of 1857. This is a very debatable topic, and a number of historians and scholars have argued in one or the other view. Some of the imperialist historians, they have suggested that it was just a sepoy mutiny, it was not a revolt, and they said that some soldiers from the British army, they revolted for certain grievances, so it was just a mutiny. While the others, they consider it as the first war of independence. The nationalist historians like Savarkar, they consider that Swaraj and Swadharma, they were the basic ingredients which filled the Indian people at that time, and they wanted to liberate India from the shackles of the British rule. And it was the first war of independence, and they wanted to liberate India from the British rule. Some consider it as a civil rebellion because large sections of the people, they participated in the revolt, and that is why their view is that it was a civil rebellion and not only a military one. Some of the historians and scholars, they have considered it as a religious war. They say that it was a religious war because it was started for a religious cause. The immediate cause was a religious one. While there are others who just consider it as some sort of a conspiracy. So in this way, there are various views with regard to the 1857 revolt. Whatever may be the nature of the revolt of 1857, but we can be sure of one thing, that it provided some sort of an inspiration to the later struggle of the Indians against the British rule. They got some sort of a will to defy the mighty colonial empire. The next phase after the revolt of 1857 is the phase of the Indian National Congress, which begins in 1885. The initial phase of the Indian National Congress is the moderate phase, which is from 1885 to 1907. The moderates believed in the policy of petition, prayer and protest. They had innate faith in the British sense of justice. They were liberal in their approach. And the kind of demands which they put forward, for example, the separation of the executive from the judiciary, the Indianization of the civil services, the condition of the indentured labor which was in foreign countries, trial by a jury, they were all progressive in nature. They also put forward an economic critique. The economic critique which was put forward by them was the drain of wealth theory. The drain of wealth theory put forward by Dadabhai Naoroji. In 1867, it evaluated that around 8 million pounds they were drained out of the revenue or the kind of amount which was drained was amounted to 8 million pounds in 1867. So these are the things which were affecting India. Then we come to another important phase, which was the phase of the Swadeshi movement. The Swadeshi movement began in 1905 with the partition of Bengal. There was an issue that whether partition of Bengal took place as some sort of administrative convenience or it was blow to the national movement, because in Bengal the national movement was rising, and British, they saw that eastern and the western Bengal, if they will be divided, then they will be able to weaken the national movement. And that is why, on the ground of administrative convenience, Bengal was divided in 1905. Risley, who was the Home Secretary, he claimed that that India will wither away because Bengal united was power, and if Bengal will be divided, then the power of the united struggle, it will wither away. Then, with the partition of Bengal, two important features of this movement was Swadeshi and boycott. Swadeshi means to emphasize on the Swadeshi goods. The Swadeshi goods which were manufactured in India, they were to be used by the Indians, and they had to boycott whatever was British or foreign, be it schools, be it colleges, be it law courts, and the bonfires of the foreign goods, they were being bonfires in different parts of the country, be it in terms of cloth or British sugar or British liquor. They were there in different parts during that time. A lot of emphasis was also placed on Atma Shakti. Atma Shakti means self-reliance. The idea was propounded by Rabindranath Tagore that we should be able to sustain ourselves, we should be self-reliant, we should not depend on British. The Rakhi Bandhan ceremony, in which people they tied Rakhis on each other's hands to show the brotherhood, was also undertaken. National education was emphasized. Bengal National College, Bengal Technical Institute, they were being opened, and various national leaders, they went to these institutes and they gave lectures in these institutes. After the phase of the moderates, the phase of the extremists, in which Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal, who were the three dominant leaders of the extremist groups, they were there. The extremists, they were critical of the mendicancy of the moderates. They did not believe in the petitions, in the prayers and the protests. And they believed that India had to gain freedom through other means. They have to come out of the constitutional means to gain their freedom. Bal Gangadhar Tilak said, Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. But the problem with the moderate politics was that they excessively glorified the ancient heritage. And at the same time, they defied the Indian nation. The defecation of the Indian nation takes place in their politics, because of which a large section of the Muslims, they were alienated because they could not identify with the movement at that time. Another phase which we see during this time was the phase of the revolutionaries. The revolutionaries, they believed in individual heroism. There are a number of revolutionaries who took part in the national movement in the sense that they attacked the government officials, they attacked the government treasuries, they looted the government treasuries to sustain their movement. They were not at all satisfied with the British government, and they were disillusioned with the policies followed by the government. And they used violence to achieve their objectives. In the later phase, we see revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, Rajguru, Ashfaq Ullah, who sacrificed themselves for the country. Then we see the phase of Mahatma Gandhi, who came to India in 1915, but who came into active politics in 1917. Before coming to discuss the politics followed by Mahatma Gandhi, let us discuss some of the ideological beliefs he had. The first was Satya and Ahimsa. Gandhi believed in Satya and Ahimsa, for which he fought all through his life. Gandhi claimed that he only wanted Satya and Ahimsa, and he did not claim any role in the superhuman powers. At the same time, Gandhi also believed in means and end. By means and end, he wanted to say that we should not get our ends by any kind of unjustified means. Our ends and our means both should be justified. We should not attain our ends by taking resort to the unjustified means. At the same time, Gandhi believed in belief and practice. Whatever he believed, he tried to put that into practice as well. The kind of methods which he employed in Indian politics were satyagraha, and the method of fast as well. Gandhi resorted to these techniques in different phases when he participated in the freedom struggle. The initial movements of Gandhi were the Champaran Satyagraha, which was against the Teen Kathiya system on indigo cultivation. Champaran Satyagraha was started in 1917. and the British planters, they forced the Indian peasants to grow indigo on around 15% of their land. And Gandhi went there and fought for the agriculturalists and was able to secure some sort of a compromise by which this system was abolished. In the Ahmedabad mill strike, Gandhi also went in favor of the labourers, and because of which a 13% increase in their wages was sought. Gandhi also participated in the Kheda Satyagraha, in which no revenue campaign against government was launched. These were the initial movements of Gandhi in which Gandhi was successful, and because of which he was able to generate some sort of a mass following in the later times. One of the most important all India struggle of Gandhi was the fight against the Rowlatt Act. The Rowlatt Act, which came to India in 1919, talked about no appeal, no vakil, and no dalil. The people, they were not allowed to appeal to the courts. They could not employ any vakil to listen to them, and they could not put forward any dalil. So which was some sort of an emergency measure, and which was used in a very civil kind of atmosphere. Because of which a large number of hartals and demonstrations were launched during this time. In one of the hartals during this time, which was held at Jallianwala Bagh, around 379 people, they were being killed. It was a peaceful assembly on which British, they attacked, and so many people, they were being killed by the British, and a large number of people, they rose in various kind of protests during this time. Then the Khilafat movement, it was launched in 1920. The British, they dismembered the Turkish Empire, and some sort of a disrespect was shown to the Caliph, and the Muslims all across the world, they consider Caliph to be their king. So that way Ali brothers and Gandhi, they launched the Khilafat movement. The Khilafat movement later merged into the non-cooperation movement. The non-cooperation movement was launched in 1920 as well, and the non-cooperation movement wanted that Indians should not cooperate with the British in any way. They should reject whatever was British. They should not take part in the British schools. They should not go to the British schools. They should not take part in the British law courts. These kind of measures, they should be undertaken. Bonfires of foreign cloth, they were also undertaken during this movement. But at Chauri Chaura in 1922, a violent act took place. Some people, those who were associated with the non-cooperation movement, they attacked a thana, a chowki, in which 22 policemen died. Gandhi was not in favor of such movement in which violence was resorted to. He decided to withdraw the movement. A number of reactions were there why Gandhi withdrew the movement, but Gandhi himself thought that he did not in any way want violence to be used as a method, and that is why he withdrew it. Another important movement of Gandhi was the civil disobedience movement. The civil disobedience movement, it was launched in 1930. It was against the salt law. Indians, they were not being allowed to manufacture salt or to use salt. They had to pay some sort of a tax on using salt as well. So Gandhi chose this issue and started a march in 1930. He started his march in March of 1930 and ended it in April, covering more than 300 kilometers. So it was an important issue, and Gandhi wanted to defy laws. It was more than non-cooperation. He did not want to not only to non-cooperate with the British, but at the same time they had to defy the British laws. They did not have to accept the British laws. One important positive feature of this movement was the participation of women. Large number of women, they participated in this movement, and it was an important feature that you see that women, they came out of their homes and they participated in this movement. Later on, we will see that some of the women, they participated in later movements as well. But It was the first time that a large participation of women was seen. Then after 1930s, Gandhi resorted to constructive work. He did not indulge in the active politics till the Quit India movement, which began in 1942. In 1942, the Quit India movement, which was launched, in which Gandhi gave the call for do or die. This movement was more violent in nature. In earlier movements, Gandhi did not resort to any kind of violence or did not accept or prescribe to any kind of violent activity. But in this movement, Gandhi allowed some sort of a violent activities also, because he felt that the unique situation of that time allowed some sort of violent activity also. At the same time, we see that Gandhi, some of the central issues which were close to Gandhi's heart were the emancipation of women, for example, for which he asked them to join the national movement, and he told them that their participation in the national movement is the extension of their household work, because as women they were not only doing their household duties, but they were coming out and supporting the national movement. The removal of untouchability, untouchability which was considered to be some sort of an evil in the Indian society, that should be removed, and Gandhi worked a lot for the Harijan welfare. At the same time, another important issue was the Hindu-Muslim unity. As we have already seen in 1920 in the Khilafat movement, in non-cooperation movement, Gandhi saw it as a golden opportunity to unite both Hindus and Muslims. And most of the times he tried his best so that Hindu-Muslim unity should remain. And during the worst of the times, when India became independent in 1947, when people were celebrating freedom, Gandhi was there in one of the villages in Calcutta, near Calcutta in Bengal, Noakhali, which was the worst affected for the communal riots. And Gandhi was preaching the lesson of Hindu-Muslim unity in that area. So he was not only a believer but a practitioner in that sense. Gandhi also indulged in village welfare as well as the promotion of charkha. So these were some of the issues which were close to Gandhi. Then we come to another important issue during this time, which was the issue of communalism. Communalism was unique to modern India. We do not see its origins in the modern sense in medieval or ancient times, but in modern times. It is generally considered that communalism has three stages or phases. In the first phase, the followers of the same religion have common socio-economic, political, cultural interest. It is suggested that this is the notion that if they belong to the same religion, then they have the same common secular interest, and these secular interests are the socio-economic, political, and the cultural interest. In the second stage, these socio-economic, political, cultural interests or the secular interest of the followers of one religion are considered to be divergent from the followers of another religion. In the third phase, these interests become antagonistic to each other. And when these interests they become antagonistic to each other, then the question of communal violence was also seen in the Indian national politics. The seeds of communalism could be seen from the times of the Sayyid Ahmad Khan, when he saw that Hindus and Muslims were two eyes of a nation. The establishment of the Muslim League in 1906, the coming of Hindu Mahasabha, the Hindu-Urdu controversy during that time, the Lahore session of the Muslim League, which took place in 1940, which demanded partition as a separate nation or state for themselves, and the Direct Action Day in 1946, which also perpetrated a lot of violence during this time, were some of the important features of communalism. Then another important issue which we can see during this time was the Indian National Army. The Indian National Army, which was launched by Subhash Chandra Bose, and his famous slogan, "Tum mujhe khoon do, main tumhe azadi dunga." And INA was able to inspire the masses because during that time, when the Second World War was going on, and Subhash, he went to Germany, then he went to different countries and sought support of Germany as well against the British, and he did not want to support British during that time. Another important phase of the national movement was the partition of India, that how India was partitioned during that time, the kind of violence which took place in the partition of India, the kind of displacement which was seen during this time. The people, they became refugees in their own country. The pain of separation from their birthplace, as we have seen in the films of Ritvik Ghatak. At the same time, we see that the films of Ritvik Ghatak in the cinema as well as literature, it was also seen. The partition violence was also seen in a large number of films. The large number of films which we see, for example, Lahore, which was made in 1949, which was film which was talking about the displacement. At the same time, other things were also happening in the film world. The films which were made like The Earth, which was made in 1997, Garm Hawa, which was made in 1973, the literature of Saadat Hasan Manto and Ismat Chugtai. The literature and cinema, they were able to portray the picture of partition, that how people, those who were uprooted from their motherland, and how they became refugees in their own country. The pain, the trauma of that partition is seen in many memoirs. The memoirs of Begum Anis Kidwai, in which she talks about the camps, the Purana Kila camp, which was there in Delhi, the people, those who migrated to Delhi from Lahore, and the people, those who migrated from Delhi to Lahore. So in that way, the people, those who became refugees in their own countries, that kind of pain was reflected in cinema as well as literature of those times. When we talk about partition, we try to see it in terms of the two-nation theory, that India and Pakistan, they were two nations. Who was responsible for the partition of India, whether it was Congress, whether it was Muslim League, whether it was the politics of Jinnah, whether it was the politics of the Congress leaders. So the question of the blame should not be seen. Rather, we have to see that how the people, those who were directly affected, they had to feel this pain of being called a refugee in their own home country. Then we come to, after the partition of India, we come to another important constitutional development, that was the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India, the preamble says that India is a secular, socialist, democratic republic. So all these ideals or the principles which are given in our constitution, they try to suggest that India is a country which is fighting for such kind of ideals in the national movement as well. Then we can very well see that the architect of the Indian Constitution, the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who borrowed the features from different constitutions and created such kind of a constitution which had withstood or around 65 years and which wants to create an equitable society. Then there are divergent viewpoints regarding the national movement, that how national movement should be viewed. Different schools of historians, they have tried to view the national movement in their concerns. For example, the Cambridge school or the imperialist school, they do not consider national movement at all. They say that it was just a mock battle or a mimic warfare. It was not a national movement at all. They are not ready to accept colonialism as some sort of a structure in India. They just see it as a colonial rule. That national movement, which was based on the colonial ideology, which was based on the colonial structures, is rejected by the imperialist school. They are not in any way ready to accept it as a national movement. They are not ready to accept India as a nation. Then the other school is the nationalist school. The nationalist school, they see this as a national movement, as a revolt of the masses to attain their independence. This is how they see the movement. They also understand the dynamics of India as a nation, that India was becoming a nation during this time. So that dynamics is generally seen by the nationalist school. Then there is another school which sees the national movement in terms which is called the subaltern school. The subaltern school says that the peasants, they had some kind of a consciousness in them, and the national movement which was led by the elite was a bogus national movement, and the original or the real national movement was the movement of the subaltern groups. So there were two distinct movements according to the subaltern historiography: the real anti-imperialist movement, the stream of the subalterns, and the bogus national movement of the elite. When we talk about the national movement, there is another group, the group of the Marxists. They see the national movement as a structured bourgeoisie movement in terms of leadership and the methods used. They also take note of the inner contradictions of the Indian society. When we sum up the national movement, we can say that it was a result of the fundamental contradiction between the interests of the Indian people and that of the British colonialism. The national leaders, they evolved a clear-cut anti-colonial ideology on which they based the national movement. They played a pivotal role by which Indian people got formed into a nation. The objectives and function of the movement was to promote growing unity of the Indian people through a common struggle against colonialism. So these were the kind of objectives and the ideals and the functions on which the national movement was based. Another important 20th century development on which I would like to talk is the emergence of cinema. Cinema began its journey in 1895. It came to India in 1895 itself in December, when some of the topicals or newsreels or short films, they were being exhibited. And the feature film production also started. And the first feature film which was made in India was Raja Harishchandra in 1913, which was made by Phalke. In the initial phase, you see a lot of mythological films, because most of the initial films, they were silent in nature. They had no dialogues. There were no techniques or methods by which dialogues could be incorporated in films. So these films were mythological in nature. For example, Raja Harishchandra, Bhasmasur Mohini, Shri Krishna. So all these films were taken from Ramayana, Mahabharata, the tales which were, the stories which were known to the Indians, so that they were able to accept them and they were to understand also because of the absence of dialogues. At the same time, these mythologicals, they gave a message also. For example, when a film called Raja Harishchandra was shown, and Raja Harishchandra was adamant on Satya or truth, then that could be equated with the national movement led by Gandhi, when Gandhi was also talking about truth and ahimsa. Then many of the films were the socials. The socials, the films like Duniya Na Mane, which was made in 1937 by V. Shantaram, a film called Achut, which was made in 1936, a film called Admi, which was made in 1939. So all these films, a film called Padosi, which was also made in 1939. All these films, they talked about Hindu-Muslim unity, caste system, mismatched marriages, which were prevalent in the Indian society. Another category was the category of the stunt film.
Okay.
The stunt films.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have a caller from Delhi, so let us take first question. Welcome, friend. Please ask your question.
Hello.
Yeah, please ask your question.
Yes, sir. I want to ask how national movement was reflected in the Indian cinema, particularly in Hindi cinema.
how the national movement was reflected in Indian cinema.
Thank you. I was coming to this argument only. I began with mythologicals and socials. And when we are talking about national movement, we are talking about Gandhi. We are talking issues which were relevant to the national movement. For example, Hindu-Muslim unity, issue of caste, issue of the various evils related to women during that time. So the films also wanted to portray these kind of things. For example, films like Duniya Na Mane, which talked about mismatched marriages. A film called Padosi, which was dealing with Hindu-Muslim unity. A film called Achut in 1940, Achut Kanya in 1936, which were dealing with the caste issues and issues of untouchability, which were there in the national movement as well. Then the stunt films which were made by J.B.H. Wadia, and in many of the films you see Nadia, the Nadia Hunter Wali. So the themes were chosen in such a manner that they were patriotic in nature and they advocated democracy. The ideas of democracy, the ideas of patriotism were also there in the national movement. So these ideas were also preached in films, but they could not do them in a very explicit manner. So they had to weave stories in such a manner that these ideas could reach the masses. Even in some of the popular masala films, there was a film called Kismat which was made in 1943. There's a song in that, आज हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है, दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है. So you do not see any kind of patriotic theme in the film itself. It was the only song which was there in the film. And the lyric of the song goes, तुम ना किसी के आगे झुकना, जर्मन हो या जापानी. So German and Japanese, they were trying to attack India in that sense, and they were considered to be threat to India. But the reference was to the British. So the British, the Indians, they were trying to hoodwink the British authorities. And I will try to just narrate an incident. There was an inspector who was sent to see this film time and again and see, because this song was relayed time and again. The people, they were demanding that in 1943 that this song should be relayed again and again. So the inspector said the import of the song is to the Germans and the Japanese and nothing to do with the British. Then we come to the realist films. Some of the realist films during this time were the Neecha Nagar and Dharti Ke Lal. Both of them were made in 1946. Dharti Ke Lal talked about the famine in 1943 which took place in Bengal, and this famine was a man-made famine. It was not a famine which occurred because of the natural reasons, because of the black marketing and the kind of policies followed by the British. This famine took place. So it was a reflection of that. Though in this way, how cinema was related to the contemporary issues or trying to project the contemporary issues in that manner was also seen in the films. In terms of impact, when we see that women, they went to theaters to see mythological films. Earlier they were not being allowed to go to theaters, but when the mythological films they came, then the elders of the family, they allowed women to go and see the mythologicals. And in these films, in between the films or before the film, some of the newsreels of the national leaders, they were being shown. So the ideas of the national movement, the women also took them when they went back to their homes. And another important aspect is cinema as a new audio-visual source of writing history. That's because new sources of history writing, they are being incorporated. And when we are talking about the oral history, oral sources, histories of partition have been written on oral sources. So why not try a new source which is audio-visual in nature? And that is why a lot of research in different universities in India and abroad is being conducted to identify cinema as a new source of history writing. At the same time, we see the portrayal of the nationalist aspirations and motifs in cinema. That how the pictures or the photographs of the nationalist leaders or the various symbols in the form of flags, etc., they were being shown in film. I'd like to talk about one film which was Marathi, it was known as Brandichi Bottle or Brandy Ki Bottle, in which it was a spoof on the prohibition campaign launched by Gandhi and the Congress. And the film talks about that why prohibition on liquor should be carried on. So these films, they were talking about the contemporary issues. And some of the nationalist leaders, they also used cinema. For example, Tilak, who was very supportive of Falke when he was making films, because his emphasis was on Swadeshi. Then we also see Vallabhbhai Patel extending his support to some of the films. And at the same time, in elections in Madras in 1937, S. Satyamurthy of Congress tried to use cinema as a propaganda means so that more and more votes could be garnered. When we see this period, the period is also witnessed for the British censorship. The British censorship was reactionary in nature. It was political and suppressive, because the kind of themes which were shown in Indian films was not acceptable to the British. They did not want to show any kind of any kind of theme which was patriotic in nature, any kind of theme which was supporting democracy, any kind of theme which was supporting revolutionary movements in Russia. So many of the films, various scenes, they were being deleted. Many of the dialogues, they were being deleted. Dialogues like Inqilab Zindabad, they were being deleted from many of the films. Many of the posters or the sketches of the nationalist leaders which were shown in the films, they were also being excised or being cut. So this was the framework when we talk about the national movement, the period from 1750s to 1950. But the period of modern India does not stop here, because the history of modern India continues even after 1950. The Nehruvian socialism, when Nehru became the Prime Minister of India, we see the Nehruvian socialism, the socialistic pattern of society which he advocated. The coming of the mixed economy, the public and private enterprises, they had to work together to attain the objectives. The 5-year plans, the introduction of the 5-year plans, in which the targets which were set for industrial growth, for agricultural growth, etc., they had to be fulfilled. The scientific and the technological developments which were undertaken during this time in the opening of the IITs, then the space programs, in the Green Revolution, all these were taking India to a newer place, which was in a modern sense. The liberalization and the globalization of the economy in 1990s, which we see, were the new developments where the Indian economy had to integrate with the world economy. And a number of measures were undertaken in the 1990s to integrate the Indian economy with the world economy. India's race to become a superpower and the journey of India to become modern continues. Thank you.
Okay, well friends, as he said, journey continues. Of course, we have come a long way, but at longer way we have to traverse. But as he have a very good historical account of the last 200 years, and we also saw the entire Indian history, the ancient India and then medieval India and modern India. So the natural question arises, what are the challenges and opportunity we have ahead? As a historian, what major challenge see in coming days?
The major challenge, because we are talking of liberalization and globalization, so the major challenge is of inequality, because when we see India, we see a lot of progress, we see a lot of infrastructural development, we see a lot of foreign investments, we see foreign institutional investments, but at the same time, when you are building all these dams, building flyovers, etc., at the same time the people, whether they are getting their due, because sometimes the government talks about that a person has to survive in rupees 30 or 35 in a day. So the challenge that how this kind of development should take place, but at the same time the wealth should be equitably distributed. When the wealth is rising, the number of poor is also rising, and when the number of poor is rising, their poverty is also rising. So that way, equitable distribution in that sense, the poor are not marginalized in the economic sense, they remain within the mainstream, that has to be seen. They should be provided with the basic amenities in terms of drinking water, in terms of education, so that they are able to improve their lot. This is how I see in terms of challenges.
Okay, so good, but we are all aware on this, and you suggested very good things. But we have seen that in the last few years, the government has taken positive steps, and a new program has come up like Narega, and there is now talk about the inclusive growth. So certainly, these left group will be taken into account, and accordingly, the policy and program will be framed. So these are the challenges, and what are the opportunity where we can capture the space and show the strengths together and make a mark in the history of the India. So what are that opportunity we should not miss?
See, India is a very young nation because we have just been independent in 1950. And the kind of challenges which India had in terms of agricultural opportunities, how agriculture was in decline, there was no industrial development, there was no per capita income, there was no national income in that sense, and how it has traveled in 65 years, and especially after 1990s with the coming of liberalization and globalization, where a lot of Indians, those who are migrating to different parts of the world or living in different parts of the world, they are contributing in that way. And at the same time, the development of the educational institutions, IITs and IIMs, engineers, doctors, and how they are being trained, and the coming of industry in terms of the industry which is associated with computers, software industry. At the same time, the telecom revolution which has come in India, that mobile telephone, which was considered to be some sort of a thing which had to be with some sort of elite sections of society, and which was some sort of a luxury, has now become a necessity, and which can be seen with everybody. So these kind of revolutions in telecom, for example, in terms of software, which came and generated a lot of revenue, a lot of money in the Indian economy. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that these kind of opportunities should not be restricted to a particular section of society. Rather, all sections of society should be able to benefit from such kind of opportunities. Then only we can go for an all-inclusive growth, as you have suggested.
Okay. So well, friends, as the old wisdom says that sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve that is the major force, the guiding force should be, only then we can say that we are moving in the right direction, because taking humanitarian ground, we can't do justice with the nation as a whole, because whether rich people or poor people, they all are a part of the same country. So well, Dr. Manoj Sharma suggested very good things, and we need to take care of all this. So with this, we'd like to conclude the lecture. And as in the beginning, it was very difficult to make it that entire about 25 years of the period to make in 3 lectures not possible, but all the resource persons have tried their best and given overview. So I am happy that you people will come to know about the general events what has occurred over the years, and will certainly help you to put the other events into the right place, and will help you to make your own interpretation. So this is why we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you, and on your behalf, I thank all experts who have delivered their best. So with this, we conclude the lecture. Thank all of you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.